Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter has tendered his resignation to the board. The power utility has been battling to keep the lights on, resorting to constant rolling blackouts. My colleague, Full View anchor Francis Hurd, interviewed de Ruyter on the 14th of July and asked him if he shouldn't resign.
But under your watch, it has emerged we had the worst year of rolling blackouts. Things have only gotten much worse since March. You've often been asked, should you step down? Is it time to go now?
I think if I were to go now, I would go at the worst possible time for the organization. I think what we need now is continuity. I think to introduce more leadership instability after 10 years and 11 CEOs, I think at last the organization is finding some semblance of normality in terms of continuity. So at this point in time, unless I'm asked to go, which then I'll gladly go, but at this time I don't intend to step down.
Do you ever fear for your life in this role?
I've received threats. I do move around with bodyguards, so that's not ideal, but that comes with the territory.
When you came in, after a while you started speaking publicly, and you were cautiously optimistic that the power cuts would ease after a couple of seasons. There's always been the caveat that if things work out correctly, if everything goes well. However, it is clear now that you vastly underestimated the scale of the problem. How did you get it so wrong initially?
I think I approached Eskom with a private sector mindset. I had no proper appreciation of the enormous bureaucracy that affects an organization like Eskom, from a procurement perspective, from a liquidity perspective, from a governance perspective. To give you an example, up until recently, to appoint a contractor, we had to go through 8 separate committees. That's now been reduced to 3, but it's still far more onerous than anything that you'd experience in the private sector. My record for the lowest amount for which I had to approach National Treasury for approval is 70,000 Rand. Now, if as the chief executive of a very large industrial corporation, I have to write a letter to National Treasury asking, please, can I sign for 70,000 Rand? You can imagine how slow that process is. So I think there's a lot of well-intentioned governance, but as increasingly we've heard also from cabinet ministers, the red tape has got to a point where it's really slowing us down to a complete standstill.
Is this the damn red tape that the Public Enterprises Minister was talking about?
I'm 100% on that same page.
So do you then support the calls for an energy emergency?
I think an energy emergency, whether you declare it or not, that's not my call. That lies in the hands of the President. But I do think that we cannot continue doing things the way that we have been doing them. I think we need to significantly streamline our processes. We significantly need to get a sense of urgency in all the various bureaucracies, including Eskom's bureaucracy. Bear in mind that we are also a very large organization suffering from a lot of inertia. And we need to get that acceleration in how we approve, for example, applications to get new capacity onto the grid. And if we all play ball through all the different government departments as well as Eskom, then I think we can address this. So whether the right tool for that is a state of emergency or whatever other method applies, it doesn't so much matter to me as the end result, which is this renewed sense of focus and urgency.
As far as you understand it, what does an energy emergency mean for Eskom processes or the bureaucracy that you're talking about? What does it mean for Eskom and for South Africa? So
this would mean, for example, that we're able to contract directly with original equipment manufacturers without having to go through intermediaries in order to satisfy the requirements of the triple PFA, the Public Procurement Framework Policy Act. It's a very onerous piece of legislation. That we can get relief from some of the requirements of the Public Finance Management Act, which I have to add, National Treasury has been forthcoming with over the last number of months. And that will enable us to procure spares without having to go out, for example, on an extensive public inquiry for every time that we want to buy a piece of equipment, when we know the spare that is required can only come from one manufacturer. So there are many of these rules that make it very, very slow for us to fix the system.
Well, this was a stunning development. Let's talk about it more with Professor Susan Booysen, political analyst, and Dr Kagiso Pooe with the Wits School of Governance. Good evening to you both, and thank you very much for being with us. I want to really start with just a couple of things he said there to my colleague Francis not 5 months ago, that it would be the worst possible time if he resigned then, and I think we're in a worse position in terms of load shedding right now. He wants continuity and he won't move unless he's asked to. Now he resigns. Susan, what do you think happened?
The pressure just
Did you
got
just say
to him. Yes. The pressure got to him big time. And we have heard about so many frustrations in the last few months, if not the last couple of years. And it has never been evident that he is completely in control of that organization. And that is very disconcerting in terms of succession and who takes over, what takes over. Is there possibly anybody who can control it? And we know that the government also, we have seen even this today, so many media reports that government is hanging Eskom out to dry, over you fix it. And that was, I won't be surprised if that was the final tipping point, that there is just not sufficient help to get Eskom off the ground again.
Wow, that's quite grim. Kagiso, your thoughts on his resignation in this moment?
Well, look, I think one could say he's either a casualty or symptom of the bigger issue of Eskom. And I think I always like starting with the fact that, look, we know we're suffering Eskom's problems right now, but we have to go back all the way to 2006 and even 1997, when reports were stated that, look, we really do need to fix things. So the bigger question I think everybody's now asking is, can anyone really stop this from, I don't know what escalating looks like. We have a running joke in the house that stage level 7 or 8 is going to be they come into your house and they blow out whatever candle you have or hope you have in your heart. And I'm hoping we're not going to get to that level. But I think it really is a symptom of the bigger issue of not just Eskom, but just where the country is, that when is this actually going to stop? We're not saying Eskom is going to be fixed tomorrow or even next year. We're simply saying, can you give us a direction? And I think that's the bigger question most South Africans are asking in general about South Africa and many state-owned entities. Can you at least tell us that there is a plan? Can you stick to a plan? And until we get that, I think we're going to see many more people like the Rata coming through who are going to say, look, I want to do something. I might not have been the best candidate, because that's another issue which does need to be discussed, but I was willing to do something. And until we really get to the point of saying, what's the plan? Can we stick to it? We're going to see many of these Derrida type situations. What
we have to point out is, while we understand that he has resigned and tendered that resignation to the board, we haven't yet had confirmation on the board's acceptance of his resignation. Sure. You spoke about, and in fact the both of you did, about looking to the future. Susan, you don't know about succession planning or who might be the person that's going to be next to drink from what is a poison chalice in terms of being the CEO, the head honcho at Eskom. But looking to the future, who could be in the running here? Who might be able to do a better job?
We know that when he ascended into the job, it was a long search process, and there were a few candidates who were approached before him and they turned it down. He was probably brave enough, or the opposite of brave enough, to accept it. And I certainly don't have any indication at this stage who might succeed him. And so it could be another long drawn-out process of acting persons, but all we know is that there's a desperate need for government does those appointments, interim acting appointment, that a strong, capable person be found with speed of lighting.
He has, the body of the office of the CEO has suffered a number of blows, particularly even the person of Andre de Ruyter. This seemed as if it was going to be inevitable. Kagiso?
It was. And look, I always comes back to, I think, what the former Statistician General said, Mr. Padi, Dr. Lehotle, because he was one of the first. And he kind of intimated a lot to say, look, if we look into the past and the future and looking at the problem of this office is, I think we always look for a name, and it's good to look for a name such as this, but maybe the key question, and maybe government also kind of needs to take this approach to say, listen, what skill do you need? Now, Eskom is just doing some reading over the weekend about it. It is a giant. it's one of those, it's a bit like the SABC. You kind of take it for granted, like, oh, they're on TV, they're on radio. When you get in, you see how ginormous it is. You really do say, oh my word, what type of skill do you need? Now, my hope, and it can only be a hope for now, is that, look, it's an engineering problem, but it's also a bit of a political problem. So the hope would be the politicians need to sort themselves out, to say, listen, let's actually give whoever comes in, we hope it's an engineer, who can actually sort out the engineering part of it, and then we handle the politics of it. Because I think sometimes we get into this minutiae forgetting it's an engineering, but there's also a political problem that needs sorting out.
Speaking of which, and it's wonderful that you introduced that nuance, because whoever is in the position would need a triumvirate of support. They would need board support, they would need the support of the minister in charge, and they would need the support of, of the president. In last week's comments from the DMR minister, Gwede Mantashe, he had strong words for Director last week. He said that Eskom was actively, well, he was talking about Eskom, but, Director's the man in charge, that Eskom was actively agitating for the overthrow of the state. And some of the criticism amongst experts like yourself is, where was the president to support him, and Minister Pravin Gordhan? Was he a man who was isolated in the end?
Probably yes. Although with the whole team, top management with him, and it's definitely, I see a case where he just didn't get sufficient support, and then being accused of, even if it was in a passing, possibly flippant comment, of bringing down the state. That is a severe comment from a government who really, they are responsible for state-owned enterprises, Eskom foremost amongst them. So there's a full, unambiguous level of support that is continuously needed in that position, and we haven't seen that. And yes, that person certainly needs to be a politician and a law enforcer as well.
Yeah. All right, so let's change gears, so to speak, and go straight into the ANC. And I want to kick things off with also what happened in Parliament yesterday. Some people's jaws are probably hanging a little bit at the outward display of dissent, in a way led by Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. Let's hear what she had to say, and then we'll look at your analysis on developments there.
We all believe in democratic centralism, but democratic centralism is not for a few. It's for all of us. You debate the issues. And when you have debated the issues exhaustively, you come to a conclusion. And then everybody follows that conclusion. This didn't happen this time. And if we're going to allow that kind of behavior within the ANC, that because it means you are actually defining other people outside that meeting. So we shouldn't allow it. It's wrong, it's unprecedented, it's wrong. I did inform the leadership, even of how I'm going to vote based on that. That's number one. They know it. If you were to ask them, 3 of them know it.
Who are these 3?
Well, it was the chair, the TG, and the deputy president. So they were not surprised.
So the chairperson, I'll come to the second issue. The chairperson of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe, and the treasurer general, who is also acting as the secretary general of the ANC, Paul Mashatile, who is actually the engine of the party, and the deputy president of the ANC, led the nation when they said the NEC adopted that position.
Well, I'm not going to speak for them. I'm telling you what happened at the meeting. I didn't speak. I was in the list. There were 20-something people who still needed to speak. So you can draw your own conclusion. If they say there was a decision, it means they are defining us out of that meeting. And I did say to them, this is wrong, and you can't give instruction based on a discussion that excluded others.
Dr. Dlamini-Zuma saying there didn't speak in that meeting, but certainly her actions spoke volumes at that meeting yesterday. What do you make of her public display, and what trend is this likely to trigger as we head towards elective weekend?
Well, I think if you look at the character of the person, this is one of the longest serving NEC members, serving ministers, and actually one of the few capable administrators in the African National Congress in government. And this is quite out of character for her. So it does really raise a deeper question, which is, and I've always said it, the ANC as a political party has really failed to become professional. And if you really cue in on what you were saying, she's saying, listen, within this party, there is no discussion. Within this party, we are failing the gravity of understanding of what the report was actually saying. So which points to me and says, who actually runs this party? If people like that, who are seasoned, who know who to speak to, what to do, are saying, listen, even I don't have a voice in this. So it really is raising other bigger questions. In terms of where it's going forward, this is quite the norm. If you think back to what happened, I think in 2017, when a similar motion about President, the late, no, I can't say the late, he's still alive, the late, help me, President Jacob Zuma.
Let's not get into trouble.
I think as he put it, it's actually quite funny how I think it was 35 people had voted to say, listen, we are going to vote for him to almost go. But it's quite weird that they were celebrated, yet Dr. Dlamini Zuma has not been celebrated. So it also raises other questions to say, is it when someone does something which is correct in their conscience, who celebrates them, who doesn't celebrate them, and really raises the question of how is the politics and how is the environment being characterized and defined in South Africa that she's not being celebrated, but those 35 were celebrated.
I want to key into that sentiment, Professor Booysen, because in a way it's different, as you say, and I want to know what kind of influence that has on the upcoming conference this weekend. I know we started as an elective conference. It's much bigger than that. Should be much bigger than that in terms of the direction of the party. But what ramifications out of this Section 89 moment are we likely to see in the way that the conference unfolds?
Yes, it is definitely a very big moment in this conference. It gives a lifeline to President Cyril Ramaphosa to continue running for the president of the organization, and then automatic also coming into the picture as a possible future repeat president of the country. So it gives him a lifeline. Without that, it would have been an uphill battle for him to stand at this conference. We also know that the reports from the ANC Integrity Committee, those will be served at the serving in the probably in the plenary meeting at the conference, and that will be side by side with digital vibes. So it is a great equalizer there, and but it helps Cyril Ramaphosa's candidacy that he's not been faulted. It hasn't got a pending impeachment hearing hanging over his head, even if he could not have been forced to step aside, because step aside concerns being formally charged or convicted. But also in relation to Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, I definitely also see her stand yesterday, and in terms of her attempted campaign also to run as president, which has not garnered a sufficient number of votes to so far be in the running, although she could still be nominated from the floor with 25% of the delegates supporting her. Yeah. So in a way, she had to make that stand, find whatever grounds it is, and we hear her. She said she wasn't allowed to speak in the NEC, wasn't given that opportunity, along with multiple others. But that is the way the ANC has been run recently. Its rules, attempted enforcement, control. We saw that same kind of control as to who speaks, who doesn't get to speak, speaking turn, etc., at the mid-year policy conference of the ANC, and in other forums of the ANC as well. And before her campaign was right on the front burner, she didn't speak out on that. So of course it is part of her campaigning as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talk about, and there could be surprises from the floor nomination, 25% support, and then suddenly you are on that list. It's also interesting what you talked about, what she said there, giving this idea of the optics of like a Stalinist grip on the party right now, with very little room for dissent. Some would say, you know, because the ANC also wants to say, and we've had numerous interviews, spokespeople and the like, festival of ideas, and we talk and it's robust, doesn't seem to be the truth of what's happening, again, in this moment.
Well, yes, and this is, I guess, it's always been, as Prof has just said, it's been the hallmark of the ANC, but it also is a hallmark of, if you study international organizations like the Indian National Congress, when it really started to dip, what happened is they tried to get more grip. Instead of actually allowing more ideas, almost like the idea of allowing light into the room, as bad as it is, it kind of ventilates the place. And now the ANC is not learning that lesson that, look, when you're in crisis, as a political organization. What you don't do is try to muzzle people, because what that does is it gives them new freedoms, new ideas to say, almost become martyrs. And I think they just keep repeating that same mistake of trying to create martyrs out of a conversation which is supposed to have. The whole nation knows it's in crisis. Embrace that you're in crisis and be open and say, listen, there are differing views, but they just seem to almost go to a corner of saying, let's replay the mistakes we've been making and hopefully something new will happen. And they just seem to be making this mistake. Hence, they're heading in the direction of the Indian National Congress, where they could not simply get over themselves and just ultimately were thrown out of power.
Well, we're going to save our lexicon for the next couple of days into the 20th, which is when we're expecting, if everything goes according to plan, that conference to end, and no doubt we'll be in discussion again. Thank you very much for your perspective with us today. Professor Susan Booysen, political analyst, and Dr Kagiso Pooe, who is with the Wits School of Governance in their Public Policy Specialist Division.